Chapter 2. Once Barb and I were able to talk with doctors attending to Jenny, we learned that they had already conducted a CT scan, EEG, and a few other tests. All of the results were normal, and it was determined that Jenny had no physical condition such as a tumor that caused the seizure she had experienced in the parking lot. The diagnosis, in a nutshell, was that Jenny had a seizure of unknown origin. While we still had many questions, we were relieved when the doctors told us there was nothing seriously wrong. Although very rare, it is not unheard of for a seizure of unknown origin to occur. Jenny was released from the emergency room without being admitted to the hospital, and we left there about 7 p.m. the same evening. We were told to be watchful and aware, but left fairly certain it was just a one-time event and nothing to be overly concerned about. There were not even any follow-up appointments scheduled. As I look back on it now, I very easily convinced myself that the seizure was a result of Jenny being tired and under a significant amount of stress as a result of working 2 jobs. The doctor recommended she take it easy and not drive a car for a few days. We left the hospital believing it was all behind us and just a small scare. Barb and I went to Jenny and John's apartment and decided to stay for a while to observe Jenny and give ourselves some assurance that she was indeed okay. Other than a weird craving for some ice cream, Jenny seemed perfectly fine on all fronts. Around 9 p.m., Barb and I left to make the 30-minute drive home. During the trip home, as well as while preparing for bed, we received some texts from Jenny. Looking back, they were a bit odd, but I can't say I thought much of them at the time. If the events of the following 3 months hadn't happened, I never would have given them a second thought. One of the texts said, "I get the giggles over the stupidest things tonight." These types of texts were out of character for Jenny, but more so it was the frequency of them it seemed a bit odd. Over a 45-minute span, she sent about 10 texts that were rather pointless. I wrote them off as giddiness, a result of coming down after a stressful event. Barb and I had been laying in bed for only a minute or two when Barb's cell phone rang. Caller ID said it was Jenny calling, but it turned out to be John on the other end. He informed us that he was calling from his truck as he followed the ambulance that was taking Jenny back to Methodist Hospital. John recounted the hour since we left the apartment. Although it was late in the evening and both of them were tired from the events of the past few hours, Jenny would not let the ice cream craving go and had convinced John to take her to Dairy Queen. After they had returned to the apartment, Jenny looked into a mirror and became mesmerized by her own image and stared for a few moments, oblivious to all else. Then her neck twisted in an unnatural direction and she made a sound that resembled a growl before falling to the floor as a grand mal seizure ensued. Little did we all understand that John was the first to see, firsthand, the demons that had taken over Jenny's brain. John did everything needed to keep her safe and helped her ride out the seizure. Then he called 911 and an ambulance was dispatched. At this point, Barb and I made another decision that now sounds irrational. John told us he would be with Jenny at the hospital, so Barb and I stayed in bed and attempted to sleep. As terrible as it sounds now, the reasons for this decision seemed very logical to us at the time. We assumed that Jenny would be admitted to the hospital that night, since it was the second time in less than 8 hours she had been taken to there by ambulance. Due to the obvious mistake made earlier in the day, when Jenny was left at the hospital alone for so long, we took precautions to be sure she would not be left alone at all moving forward. The 3 of us put a very simple plan in place for how we could best manage our employment obligations, as well as make sure that Jenny had a family member with her at all times between that moment and the weekend. John had essentially taken the first shift since he was following Jenny to the hospital, therefore it made sense for Barb and me to get some rest. The plan was for me to replace John at some point during the night, and for Barb to go to work in the morning in order for her to be available Thursday night and into Friday. At this point, we had no idea what to expect in terms of how long Jenny would be in the hospital, but it seemed wise to be prepared. It also seemed logical to believe that our plan only had to get us to the weekend. Surely Jenny would not be in the hospital more than a day or two. No one stays in the hospital more than overnight these days. Modern technology allows doctors to identify and treat illnesses in a matter of hours. Common sense and every level of conventional wisdom had me believing this was a short-term situation because, while seizures are a serious issue, up to this point she had only had two. And everything I had learned over the past few hours told me that seizures could be controlled with medication if necessary. Ironically, the decision not to leave Jenny alone would never change. But the reasons for it, and the reality of actually trying to accomplish it, would change dramatically. The demands of our lives, outside of the hospital as well as our own health, would be greatly affected as time passed.